An introduction to the Arnups of Arnups Mill, now known as Stracey Arms Mill. Stracey Arms Drainage Mill is a well-known landmark between Acle and Great Yarmouth in Norfolk. However, for most of its working life, the mill was known as Arnups Mill. The mill was run by members of the Arnup family from its construction in 1883 to 1937, almost the whole period that the mill was active. The Arnups are also known to have worked a previous mill here that was replaced by the current tower mill. In this short film, we will find out who the Arnups were and why the mill is now known by a different name. An article published in the Yarmouth Independent in 1917 refers to the dredging of the Riverbure. It measures a stretch as being between Arnups Mill and Stokesby. This grainy image is thought to show George Arnup. He was the first person to run the mill after it was built in 1883. However, he was not the first member of his family to work a mill at the site. George was born on 10th of December 1844. He was baptised at the parish church in Tunstall in February the following year. His parents, William and Emily, already had several children by the time George was born. The 1841 census, taken 4 years earlier, shows William and Emily Arnup living in Tunstall with their 4 children, Emily, aged 9, William, aged 4, Charlotte, aged 2, and James, aged 8 months. A mill and a mill house are clearly marked on the tithe map for the parish of Tunstall during this period. This is the same site as the current mill, indicating that a previous mill, or mills, once stood on the same spot. So when did the Arnups become associated with this mill? The answer lies in the baptism records of William and Emily's children. James, Charlotte and William were all baptised in Tunstall between 1837 and 1840. However, the oldest sibling, Emily, was baptised at All Saints Church in Rackheath on 5th of April 1832. All Saints Church at Rackheath has been redundant since the 1970s. The churchyard contains the graves of several members of the Stracey family who once lived at Rackheath Hall. Several Stracey memorials are also attached to the walls inside the church. These include one to the Reverend Sir George Stracey, who was rector at Rackheath for 56 years. George Stracey is recorded as the rector that carried out the baptism of Emily in 1832. The parish register also shows that he officiated at the wedding of her parents 2 years earlier and that they were from the parish. The church registers for Tunstall and neighbouring Halvergate indicate that William and Emily had another child who was not recorded on the 1841 census. William was born in 1835 and died in infancy. He was buried on St Valentine's Day in 1837. So it appears that William and Emily Arnup arrived in Tunstall sometime between April 1832 and October 1835. At this time, the Stracey Arms was an inn on the newly opened toll road between Acle and Great Yarmouth. Now part of the A47, this section of the road is known locally as the Acle Straight. Both the inn and the mill were owned by Sir Henry Stracey of Rackheath Hall. It seems likely that William had been a worker on Sir Henry's estate in Rackheath before being offered the job of marshman at Tunstall. It is not known why William was favoured in this way, but it is intriguing to note that modern maps show an area of mixed woodland called Arnup's Belt located to the east of Rackheath Hall. Little is known about the mill that was run by William Arnup. No pictures or plans of the structure appear to have survived. However, we do know that William and Emily remained here until the 1870s. By 1881, and aged 75, William had retired and the role of marshman was inherited by his son George. George, his wife Tabitha and their 8 children are listed at the Marsh House on the 1881 census. The neighbours were the Youngs who lived at the Stracey Arms Inn. Squirrel and Betsy Youngs had a young family of their own. Squirrel was the innkeeper at the Stracey Arms Inn, a position he held from the late 1860s to the late 1880s, the same period of time that George Arnup was taken over as marshman from his father William just down the road. the job of marshman entailed more than simply running the drainage mill. The marshman was also responsible for clearing dykes and looking after grazing cattle on the Halvergate marshes on behalf of their owners. The Halvergate marshes remain the largest area of grazing marsh in the east of England. Flooding in winter reduces the quality of pasture in summer, so good drainage management year-round continues to be important. By the time this article appeared in the Dis Express and Norfolk and Suffolk Journal in 1921, George Arnup had died, and the role of marshman had been inherited by his eldest son, who was also called George. It reports details of an inquest into the death of a car passenger who died on the Acle Straight after a wheel came off the vehicle he was travelling in and it plunged into a dyke. George was called as a witness, as he was the one who had retrieved the car and the body. During his testimony, George complained about the state of the road and the number of accidents that it caused. Leonard, the great-grandson of William and Emily, was the last member of the family to run the mill. Unfortunately, his untimely death in 1937, aged 34, ended the association between the mill and the Arnups. The mill continued to be run until the 1940s, when it was replaced by an electric pump. But the mill took on the moniker of the family that owned it, rather than the one that ran it. It became Stracey Arms Mill. The mill was gifted to Norfolk County Council by Dame Kathleen Stracey in September 1965. Now a Grade II star listed building, it is managed on their behalf by the Norfolk Windmills Trust. A project to restore the mill, supported by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, began in 2017. The mill and the Marshfolk project will ensure that the stories of the people that lived and worked here will be remembered and that the mill itself can be enjoyed for generations to come.